I would like to introduce our next speaker, John Livermore. John Livermore is a principal for sustainability services at EBP. John is a creative sustainability professional with 30 years experience and a proven track record of success designing and implementing award-winning energy efficiency and clean transportation programs and sustainability projects in collaboration with utilities, federal and state agencies, municipalities, clean energy stakeholders, and private clients. He's worked at architecture and engineering firms, solar energy companies, energy and environmental nonprofit organizations as a private consultant, and having founded 2 mission-driven sustainability organizations. John had the opportunity to address sustainability challenges from multiple perspectives. He enjoys working collaboratively with clients and bringing his experience to bear to solve problems. John's team recently completed a 2-phase feasibility study about construction and demolition waste on Nantucket that MPT contracted with the help of Remain, and its potential for salvage and reuse. And EBP is a Boston-based company that provides state-of-the-art economic analysis and research to support planning and policy. So please join me in welcoming John Livermore.
Hopefully I'll get the arrow right. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here, and a big thank you to Mary and Virna's team for their amazing support throughout this project. We couldn't have done it without them. So yes, my firm, EBP, is a sustainability and economics firm in Boston with our head office in Switzerland, actually. And it was really fascinating to hear Andy's presentation. I returned from a trip to Zurich last week where I had the pleasure of meeting with the gentleman who's responsible for all of the Swiss embassies around the world. And his key message was accounting for embodied carbon is the next big thing in the market. So this is a worldwide phenomenon, not just here in the US. And they actually made a strategic decision to renovate their London and Singapore embassies to add on to the existing building as opposed to demoing and building new. And the really cool thing is that what happens in London and in Singapore affects us here in Massachusetts, and what we do in Massachusetts affects them as well, because we're all in this biosphere together. So I have the pleasure of working with a great team at EBP. Adam, Brett, and Allison also contributed to the study, but you'll have to put up with just me today. I head up the sustainability division at EBP, trained as an architect. I got off on the sustainability tangent a long time ago. And leading the building materials salvage study was a wonderful opportunity to explore a new way to approach sustainability. So our team came into this project firmly grounded in an understanding of the urgency of addressing the climate crisis through actionable and impactful approaches that support a more circular economy. Now, every year on Nantucket, more than 17,000 tons of construction and demolition waste is transported off island, much of which eventually ends up in landfills in Ohio and in Maine. And much of this waste is a result of demolition of buildings on Nantucket, and a significant portion of these discarded materials has the potential to be salvaged and reused through deconstruction. So we kicked off our study in 2021 with a meeting with the WPI students who the previous year had done some great research on deconstruction practices on Nantucket. And we used their baseline work as a springboard for designing and executing our study scope. So our project was divided into 2 phases. Phase 1 for Remain Nantucket was the market impact and feasibility analysis, where we looked at supply of reusable materials, attitudes around deconstruction, economic value of reusable materials, businesses which benefited from and how, workforce needs, avoided carbon emissions, and salvage facility feasibility. And in phase 2, which we did for Nantucket Preservation Trust, we explored existing working models around the US and then new ordinance development. And we researched regulations elsewhere, models of collection and distribution, support for affordable housing, other organizations' experiences, residents' perspectives, which was very enlightening and great, strategic partnerships, and development or potential development of an ordinance. And ultimately, the goal was to provide actionable insights into how better to use Nantucket's building and construction resources through comprehensive deconstruction policy while having a positive impact on the island's long-term sustainability. I'll note that a theme throughout our study was a frequent emphasis on the affordable housing challenge on the island. Rents are relatively high relative to the rest of the state and the nation as a whole. In a recent US Census Bureau survey, the median rent for a 2-bedroom house unit on Nantucket was just over $1,800 per month, 27% higher than the Massachusetts statewide median. And the high cost of housing on Nantucket presents a challenge for year-round residents as well as seasonal workers. So we looked for linkages between building materials salvage solutions and affordable housing solutions. So first, we estimated the supply of salvageable construction and demolition materials by weight, volume, and pieces in order to then estimate the value of reusable materials, estimate avoided carbon emissions, and then estimate the space needed to collect, stage, store, and distribute or sell the materials. And this figure presents the approximate distribution of C&D materials by type based on information from the Vancouver Demolition Waste Calculator. And wood represents the largest share of total waste at over 8,000 tons. So the total estimated value of reusable materials using the $100 per ton figure, which we've verified, is close to $500,000 each year. So we conducted 9 interviews with residents to better understand attitudes and opinions on deconstruction and reuse of salvaged materials on island. And in general, people we interviewed were very supportive of more deconstruction on Nantucket, but had various concerns. We heard repeatedly that deconstruction is more expensive than demolition, and as a result, it is often less expensive to purchase new materials for projects. To insurers and building codes require that certain materials be under warranty when used in new construction or renovations. And then there's the time sensitivity of clients wanting to complete projects quickly. And this map shows zones accepting lumberyard and warehouse uses. And there's a large concentration of properties around the airport, which is located within the large purple commercial industrial district, which is approximately 455 acres. So the main barriers to a salvage facility on island are high property costs and that workers might require subsidization to pay them living wages, given the high housing costs. We also looked into labor costs, accessing a data set for the Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket regions, and to get a sense of expected labor costs for salvage facility workers. The closest equivalent to a salvage building materials facility worker was transportation and warehousing industry, where the median hourly wage is about $16 per hour and a median salary of $33,000 per year. According to MIT's living wage calculator, only an experienced warehouse laborer would earn a living wage on Nantucket, which is about $20 per hour for a single adult with no children and certainly higher for families. And this suggests that wage subsidization or a housing allowance may be required to create living wage jobs at a salvage facility. This slide shows an order of magnitude comparison of demolition costs versus deconstruction costs for an average residential home. At the low end, deconstruction is actually slightly cheaper than demolition, and at the high end, deconstruction still costs about 45% more than demolition, or about $15,000. But by any of these approaches, the cost difference adds little actually to the total construction cost and is relatively small relative to the median and average home prices on island. This also doesn't include the revenue from resale of salvaged materials or the value of the tax benefit from donating salvaged materials, which can close the cost difference even more. Next, we looked at businesses and industries that will be most impacted by increased deconstruction and material reuse. This slide shows the downstream impacts of deconstruction compared to demolition. And the deconstruction process itself supports more jobs for more days of work than demolition. And the process of collecting, warehousing, and selling salvaged materials supports additional jobs. So deconstruction work is a skilled trade that requires more training, but which results in career living wage jobs. Then we estimated the potential job creation in deconstruction-related industries and unrelated industries that would also benefit from new transactions. There are an estimated 184 businesses on Nantucket in industries that are related to or impacted by deconstruction and material reuse. These businesses contribute about 1,300 jobs to Nantucket's economy, and these industries contribute approximately $320 million in GDP to the local economy. According to a study conducted by the city of San Antonio, activity in the circular waste stream generates many, many more jobs than landfilling or simply recycling waste. And looking at this in terms of jobs per 10,000 tons of waste, landfilling, which is a linear process, gets you about 1 to 6 jobs. Recycling, which is partially circular, gets you about 36 jobs, whereas reuse, which is completely circular, gets you 300 jobs. And workforce development and training is also important for deconstruction. A Portland, Oregon study found that the amount of reusable building materials obtained from a deconstruction effort was highly correlated with the contractor performing the work, much more so than the age or size of the building being dismantled due to greater deconstruction skill and experience. So since reducing carbon emissions is so vital, as Andy was talking about, and Vince and everybody, we estimated the avoiding carbon emissions associated with reusable C&D materials that are currently put into the Nantucket waste stream, and the embodied energy of new materials required to replace those discarded materials. And Nantucket's unique geography obviously makes shipping materials to and from the island more cost and energy intensive than for most municipalities in Massachusetts. This graph illustrates the embodied and operational carbon across the life cycle of a building, from extracting raw materials to manufacturing of the product to transporting the product. And this is not the circular economy that we're looking for, but it is currently standard practice. And so here, as Mark Twain said, the biggest room in the house is the room for improvement. And here we have the avoided emissions from decreased transportation, landfilling, and new materials: CO2, nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxides, volatile organic compounds, particulate matter, and ozone that's created when you combine a lot of those elements. The big impact here is transporting C&D waste to landfills. Reese Trucking, which is one of the two transporters on island, materials end up at Crossroads Landfill in Norwich Walk, Maine, which is 309 miles away from Nantucket. And this is a truck, ferry, truck-to-truck operation. Waste Options has materials that end up at Sunny Farm Landfill in Fostoria, Ohio, which is 908 miles away. Truck, ferry, truck to a 775 train mile trip. So you get a sense of why it's important to be reducing these materials. And there's an additional impact, the embodied carbon, in the creation of new materials to replace those discarded materials. And another big driver here is the Massachusetts 2030 Solid Waste Master Plan, which establishes goals to reduce disposal statewide by 30% by 2030 and 90% reduction in disposal by 2050. We have some big goals on the horizon, and I think we're on the right path here. So in the existing ordinance research and new ordinance development phase of our study, our team explored existing deconstruction and reuse ordinances around the country to see what elements might be applicable to the Nantucket community. Some ordinances, such as those in California, were driven by the need to meet the standards of state-level environmental legislation. Others were established in recognition of the significant contribution construction and demolition waste makes to landfills and to reduce municipal waste costs. Notably in Portland, Oregon, the ordinance was driven in large part by citizen dissatisfaction with the large amount of dust and noise being generated with the many demolition projects occurring in neighborhoods around the city. So there's a wide variety of ordinance types in use around the United States. Ordinances with deconstruction and reuse requirements. Some prohibit use of heavy machinery and so forth. Ordinances with diversion requirements, per square foot minimums, weight per square foot disposal maximums. Ordinances that use a scorecard requiring demolition permit applicants to earn a total number of points. And then applicability, type of activity, type of structure, residential or commercial, building age, size, or value. And for instance, in Vancouver, BC, their green demolition bylaw applies only to homes built before 1950, but applies a higher recycling minimum and an additional salvage requirement on homes built before 1910. In terms of enforcement, runs the gamut from fines and penalties to project delays, withholding final occupancy permits, deposit-based with refunds at the end of the project when the program requirements are finally met. And other miscellaneous pieces, use of approved contractors, haulers, or disposal facilities as a requirement, and then general reporting requirements pre and post project. The City of Vancouver, BC, again, created an online demolition waste generation calculator to help homeowners estimate the amount of waste that they'll be required to recycle by material type to meet municipal requirements. So the most common model for material reuse distribution is the nonprofit model. We analyzed 6 of these building reuse programs to identify key operational details. I looked at facilities in Boston, Springfield, Massachusetts, Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, Devens, Massachusetts, and the reuse people who are nationwide. And one of the standout nonprofit models is Eco Buildings Bargain in Springfield, Massachusetts, run by the nonprofit Center for Ecotechnology, which coincidentally was my first job out of college with them. Good people. The facility is a 30,000 square foot facility retail store and a 20,000 square foot building materials warehouse. And the facility is operated by 14 staff. They offer a pickup service, and the store has 2 donation representatives whose sole job is to develop relationships with builders, lumber yards, manufacturers, and other potential donors. And new materials are priced at 50% off of retail price and used materials 30%. And the store's projected sales of $1.5 million last year. They're doing pretty well. And one of the best municipal models we found was the TIPS warehouse in Huntsville, Texas. The operation recruits donors and shoppers with ongoing community outreach through flyers, referrals from nonprofit organizations, online media, and word of mouth. The usable materials are brought to the city's transfer station, weighed, and then stored in a dedicated warehouse. An interesting for-profit model is Ballard Reuse in Seattle, Washington. The business offers materials pickup and deconstruction services and sells salvaged materials to the public. And they also accept donations on behalf of the Seattle nonprofit Recreative, who receives a percentage of the sales of those materials. We also looked at how different reuse operations integrate material reuse with affordable housing, and found that all of these programs and facilities support affordable housing both directly and indirectly. And the 2 most common ways are, number 1, to steep material discounts to low-income customers and nonprofit organizations, and 2, the materials are actually not for sale and are available free to nonprofit organizations. So the takeaway here is that there are numerous models for successful building materials reuse programs and facilities that Nantucket can learn from in developing the best approach for the island. One of my favorite parts of the study was our outreach to key Nantucket stakeholders and organizations to gather their feedback and insights and to help build support for policy action on deconstruction and reuse. Our outreach consisted of email invitations and 30-minute video interviews with these 11 key Nantucket stakeholders, some of which I know are here in the room today. Our conversations consisted of input on the 4 general categories of deconstruction ordinances we found among U.S. municipalities, the ordinance's compatibility with Nantucket, and the interviewees' thoughts on how best to approach deconstruction and encourage building material reuse on the island. And I have to say, one of the most memorable interviews I had was with Town Preservation Planner Holly Backus. She was a complete delight and a treasure trove of information on deconstruction, preservation, and Nantucket history. I learned a lot. The overall message that came through in all of the interviews was that each of the stakeholders cares deeply about preserving the architectural history of Nantucket, and they are committed to exploring ways to increase building deconstruction and materials reuse. Each of the stakeholders provided an assessment of the current state of building construction and material reuse from their vantage point in the Nantucket building ecosystem. And their observations and insights collectively provide an informative composite picture of the current landscape, including challenges that could be addressed through an ordinance or other market intervention. And I encourage you to read this section of our report, but here are some of the key thoughts that we heard, and I won't read through them, but highly valuable. And it's also worth noting that there's an informal building materials reuse system on Nantucket. I think that was mentioned earlier, including the Cape Cod and Islands Craigslist, the Nantucket Reuse Exchange, and the Facebook group Nantucket Architectural Salvage. So the overall takeaway from the stakeholder interviews is that this is a multifaceted problem requiring a holistic, integrated solution. A successful strategy will garner enough support from town residents and stakeholders, and it will likely require 5 things: linking solutions to support for affordable housing, establishing an on-island salvage materials facility, providing deconstruction training, town and stakeholder involvement in designing the strategy, and then number 5, exploring an ordinance with, again, 4 parts: a lengthened demo delay period, 6 to 12 plus months, like most other Massachusetts communities. 2, a demo fee or deposit program, and a revised process starting with the Historic District Commission and then advertising after that, and also including incentives and other support. And it's worth noting that of the 150 communities in the Commonwealth that have a demolition delay bylaw or ordinance, the town of Nantucket is an outlier as only one of 2 communities with a delay period of less than 3 months. Similar Massachusetts communities with historic districts such as Provincetown, Concord, and Chatham have demolition delay periods of 6 months, 12 months, and 18 months, respectively. And some further thoughts in developing an ordinance for Nantucket. Any ordinance must be paired with education and engagement. We must involve builders and the real estate industry in the conversation. We must communicate that ordinances promote sustainability. And a further option would be to provide grants directly to builders to offset the added costs of deconstruction. For instance, the town could potentially design a program to target buildings that are most likely to yield the most significant amount of reusable materials. And finally, we mapped the existing properties and their age to determine how many properties on the island could be impacted. This map shows tax parcels on Nantucket by year, which a structure on the parcel was built. And of the approximate 13,700 tax parcels on the island, about 9,600 contain a built structure. Of parcels containing a built structure, approximately 1,200 structures, or 13%, were built prior to 1900, shown in blue. An additional 2,200 structures, or 23%, were built between 1900 and 1975, shown in yellow. And over 6,100 structures, 64%, have been built after 1975, shown in red. Interestingly, the National Park Service considers 1975 to be the end of the period of significance for historical buildings that contribute to Nantucket's National Historic Landmark. About 3,500 parcels, or 36%, contain a structure built before 1975, many of which are located right here in town. So the phase 2 study results indicate that there are multiple policy approaches to encourage or require deconstruction and building material reuse that have been employed by communities around the US to support sustainability objectives. And beyond the clear environmental benefits, the other drivers to implementing deconstruction and reuse policy measures include historic preservation, depletion of natural resources, declining landfill capacity, cost savings, and the affordable housing crisis. So after identifying and analyzing the key strategies and leverage points, the primary recommendations of our study included convening stakeholders to build support and design and implement an ordinance, or start talking about it. I think that's partly the reason we're here today. Explore comprehensive deconstruction ordinance for approval at town meeting. Extend demolition delay period to 6 to 12 plus months. Revise the demolition delay process. Explore additional incentives for deconstruction to make it more cost effective. Devote resources to training workers. Establish an on-island materials storage facility. Partner with off-island materials reuse operations, potentially as an interim approach. And pursue deconstruction pilot concepts with the Habitat Cape Cod, who are interested in working out some cooperative arrangements. Use deconstruction ordinance fees and building material sales to support affordable housing and create a public awareness campaign. And finally, make the deconstruction policy process and support mechanisms straightforward and easy to understand and navigate. And as one of the interviewed stakeholders said, people will do the right thing if it's not too difficult. You have to make it easy for them. So there are other innovative deconstruction and reuse models out there, including the Deconstruction and Reuse Network in Long Beach, California. It's a good example of a non-warehouse deconstruction and reuse program and combines a deconstruction network with a reuse network. The reuse people are headquartered in Oakland, California, with facilities in 8 states throughout the US. They operate retail warehouses and offer a range of deconstruction and materials reuse services, including deconstruction contracting. They also operate the Reuse Institute, also located in Oakland, which provides deconstruction training and certification. And finally, deconstruction contractor Goodwood illustrates Portland, Oregon's success. Over the past 4 years, the city has deconstructed more than 420 single-family and duplex homes that were registered as historic places or built before 1940. Goodwood has taken apart 160 of them. And overall, there are 19 contractors licensed to deconstruct in the city of Portland, thanks in part to a city-sponsored training program. And reports are that the cost of deconstruction has actually gone down since the rule went into effect. So this is all very exciting. There's so much happening around the country in the deconstruction and reuse space, and hopefully this has given you a sense of some of the options of what's possible for us here in Nantucket. So thank you, and we're really excited to see the next steps.